Della Ballard did not look up from her cracked hands when the laughter went around the water meeting at the county seat, though every stockman leaning back in those chairs knew she had buried her father the summer before last and driven 30 miles of dust-choked road on a drought-thin horse to stand in the door and be laughed at. She had come to the fall meeting of the Rincon Stock Association to say a plain thing out loud in front of witnesses. That she meant to hold her dead father's water right, the oldest appropriation on Rincon Creek, filed the spring of 1869 and senior to every other ditch on the whole drainage, and to keep it in honest beneficial use straight through the drought and the 90 days that lay between her and the territorial adjudication, whatever it cost her in cattle, and she had gotten as far as the words "my water" when the room decided it was the funniest thing it had heard since the creek quit running in June. She stood in the doorway with the $1,200 note the bank had let the company quietly buy, folded in her coat pocket like a stone. And she let them laugh, and she counted, the way her father had taught her to count anything that frightened her, slow from 1 until her pulse came back down under her own hand. If this is your kind of country, take one quiet second to subscribe and ride along, because what an unwed girl and a horse the whole county called a worthless scrub did over the 90 days that followed. Across a chained headgate, a fouled tank, a flooded arroyo, and the first killing blizzard of that hard winter is the kind of ride the Rincon told on itself for the next 50 years, and told wrong every time. The meeting was held in the long back room of the Drover's Rest at the county seat, because the Drover's Rest had the only table in the country long enough to seat every outfit on the creek under one roof at once, and the smell of it was cold coffee and cigar smoke and the particular dry dust of a country 3 months without rain. 24 men filled the chairs, the big outfits and the little ones, and the 2 bankers who held paper on most of them, and Della had come in the side door out of the heat in her good gray dress, with her chin level, which the country had long ago decided was pride, and which was in fact only the discipline of a woman who had learned that if she let her face move at all, it would move all the way. She was 26 years old that summer. She was not a large woman. Her hands were a horseman's daughter's hands, brown and split at the knuckle, and there was no ring on any finger of either one, which the country had also long ago decided was a thing to be settled by her selling out and marrying, the sooner the better, before an unwed girl made a public fool of herself on a man's ground. Now, Miss Ballard. That was Bland Cardigan, who chaired the meeting because his father had chaired it, a soft, heavy man, who was not unkind and not much else either. Nobody here doubts your grit, Lord knows. But a horse outfit on a failing creek in the worst drought this country's seen is a hard thing for a full crew of seasoned men to carry in a good year, and this has not shaped up a good year. There's no shame in a young woman letting the note be assumed and selling her stock for what it'll bring and starting fresh somewhere a girl's got people. The note is $1,200 and everyone at this table knows who bought it, Della said. Her voice was low and it carried, because she had pitched it to carry across a branding fire over the ball of 100 head and did not have to raise it now. The water on my ditch is worth 10 times the note and the outfit both, because it is the senior right on this creek, and senior water in a dry country is the only wealth that keeps. Sell out and I've handed a fortune to the man that dried me to make me sell, at a losing girl's figure, and thanked him for the favor. I can do the arithmetic on the difference, Mr. Cardigan, so can every man laughing. That quieted a corner of the room, because it was true, and because a stock town will forgive a woman almost anything faster than it will forgive her doing sums out loud. But it was into that particular little silence that Colonel Amos Thorne chose to unfold himself up out of his chair at the head of the table, and the room turned to him the way iron filings turn. Because Amos Thorne was the cattle business of the Rincon country, the way weather is a country, the largest thing in it, and the thing every smaller thing arranged itself around. He was 58 that year, and men called him the Cattle King, and he had earned the title the way such titles are earned, one dried-out neighbor at a time, until the anvil and the eastern money behind it, the Coronado Land and Cattle Company, that no man on the creek had ever laid eyes on, held the grass and the water and the paper on every outfit along Rincon but the one Owen Ballard had. Proved up years back, the senior ditch, the first appropriation, the oldest and best water in the country, and the only water Thorne did not own. He was a cold, correct gray man in a good gray suit, and he did not come around the table with warmth the way a smaller schemer would. He stayed where he was, and folded his hands on the table, and spoke low and reasonable, which was the most dangerous thing he did all day. Because Amos Thorne, being reasonable, was Amos Thorne deciding a thing was already settled, and his reason had cost more men their outfits than another man's anger ever had. "I'll say a thing plainly," he told the room, "and Miss Ballard may take it however she likes." He turned his gray eyes on her, and there was nothing in them warm and nothing in them cruel, which was the worst of him. "I stood at Owen Ballard's grave the summer before last, and I meant what I said over it. Your father was a stockman this country will not see the like of again, and if he had lived you would not be standing in that doorway, and neither would I be saying this. But he did not live, and it is a plain kindness, not a cruelty, to tell an unwed girl the truth no one else at this table has the stomach to tell her, which is that a woman alone cannot hold a horse outfit through a drought like this one, and that every month she tries, the note grows and the stock thins and the ground goes to ruin that a proper outfit could keep. I'll assume your note at the bank tomorrow morning. I'll pay you $800 cash for the outfit, the stock, and the ditch, which is more than a forced sale would bring you in a dry fall, and you keep your saddle and your good name, and start your life over with money in your hand instead of a lien on your neck. My lawyers have drawn it fair." He looked around the table, collecting the nods he had grown there like a crop. "That is a decent offer, and there is not a man here would call it otherwise." There was not. The room hummed its agreement, and one of the bankers looked at Della with the particular pity that is 3 parts relief it is not him. It was, laid out flat on that long table, the whole of Amos Thorne's genius he had offered, in front of 24 witnesses, to save her. And the price of being saved was the ditch and the senior right, which were the only 2 things on Rincon Creek he had ever wanted, and without which the outfit was a dry section of burned grass and a house. He would pay $800 and the balance of a note he had bought himself, and take back the oldest water in the country, worth more than every steer he owned. And the county would remember for a generation that he had done it out of the goodness of his heart to a girl who had no business trying. Della looked at him a moment, and then she looked at the note in her hand, and then she did the thing that decided the next 90 days, which was that she folded the paper back into her pocket and shook her head once, slow, side to side, the way you tell a green horse no when yes would hurt it worse. "I thank you for standing at my father's grave," she said. "I'll not sell his water off the back of it. I'll keep my own ditch in my own honest use to the adjudication, and I'll answer your contest in open court with the record, and then I'll come home and pay my own note over my own counter." She turned to the room, and for the first time she let a little of it into her voice, not much, a hairline. "I came here asking no favor, and I'm leaving with none. But I'll ask you to remember, when it's told, that I stood in this door and said I'd hold it, and that Colonel Thorne sat at that table and offered to see that I couldn't." It was too fine a line for most of the room to feel the edge of, and Thorne only inclined his gray head a 1/4 of an inch, which meant the reasonableness was over. But Bland Cardigan felt it, and looked down at his own soft hands, and old Judge Cyrus Tandy, who was at the county seat riding circuit, and had come to the meeting for the coffee and not the cattle, took his cigar out of his mouth and studied the small brown woman in the doorway with a new and unlaughing attention, and filed her away, the way a judge files a thing he suspects he will see again under oath. She walked out through the wagon yard, where the drover's rest kept its teams, and she did not let her hands shake until she was up on the seat of her own light wagon and out past the last building of the town, and by then it was only the heat. Owen used to say a horse reads your hands before it reads your voice, and a town is only a bigger horse that talks. And in the 2 years since the arroyo took him, the flood come down the dry Rincon in the black of a July night, her father found a mile below the anvil's first low dam with his drowned horse and a cut cinch, and the country calling it drink, and a stubborn old fool trying to ford a flash flood, though Owen Ballard never took a drink in his life. In those 2 years, Della Ballard had given the country nothing off her hands at all. Not at the burying, not through 2 dry springs, not when the bank turned the note over in her fingers like a thing already spoiled. She had held a senior water right and a string of good honest homebred horses together with her own 2 hands and whatever wage she could scrape. And she had heard herself called the Ballard girl, in the voice men use for a gate that hangs crooked, and she had learned exactly one lesson from all of it, which was Owen's lesson, and it was this: rain makes every pasture green, and it is the dry year that asks whose roots went down. She said it to herself now, out loud, on the hot seat, the way she said it most days. And then she gathered the lines and clucked to the team and drove the long miles home to the ladder B under a sky the color of scorched tin. And the last 2 miles the road ran along the pole fence of her own horse pasture. And beyond the poles, in the last of the light, the horse stock stood dark and gathered at the dry tank. Good honest using horses every one, and standing off from them, alone. At the far corner of the fence where he always stood because a stud stands his own watch, the one horse the whole country had told her was not worth the grass he ate. Copper was a stallion, 7 years old that summer, the deep rich red of a new scoured copper kettle, near 17 hands and heavy through it, with a broad plain honest head and a thick neck and legs like porch posts. Black stockinged and a little feathered at the fetlock, and there was nothing fine drawn or blooded looking about him from any side at all. He was a using horse to look at, a working horse, the kind of coarse, deep-built animal that a plow would not shame, and the country, which prized a slim, fast-blooded Kentucky horse above nearly anything a man could own, and measured a horse's worth by the daylight it could show in a quarter-mile dash, had looked at that big, plain, red stud exactly once, years back, and decided everything it intended to decide about him. Scrub, they called him. Cold-blood, a plow horse got up to think he was a saddle horse, a coarse homebred thing without a line of racing blood in him, not worth $1 against any weedy-blooded colt in the country. A horse to geld and put to a harrow and be done. The truth of it, which no one but Owen had ever troubled to learn, was the whole opposite, and it was written in the one book the blooded horsemen never read, which was the book of the long dry mile. Owen Ballard had bred that stud on purpose, over 30 years of it, breeding not for the first quarter mile, but for the last 20. For bone and wind and heart, and the deep patient bottom that answers when the speed is gone and the day turns hard. And he had crossed his big honest range mares on a heavy territory stud, and got, at the end of all his patience, this one. A horse with the plainest head and the deepest bottom in the country. A horse the fine men laughed at in the cool of the morning, and would have paid a fortune. For at the bottom of the last dry mile, if they had ever once had the sense to ride there, they had come for him twice, the men who buy cheap coarse horseflesh for the plow and the freight hitch, $1 cash for the big scrub, take him off your feed bill. And both times Owen had run them off the place, and both times he had said the same thing to Della after, standing at this same fence. They see the plow in his legs, and they can't see the country in his bottom. Blood shows in the first-mile girl, and every man in this county is a first-mile man. Bottom shows in the last, and the last mile is the only one that ever saved a life. Owen had bred the horse for the last mile, and had spent 7 years proving him quietly on the long circles and the dry drives, and had died before the country ever had cause to see what he was. And Della had kept the stud through 2 dry springs, when $1 was $1, and could not have told the bank or the meeting or her own tired self exactly why, except that when she stood at that fence in the worst of the dark, broke and alone and 30 miles from a friend, the big red stud would come the length of the pasture to her, without being called, and lower that great plain kind head, and breathe warm against her shoulder, and it was the only thing in the Rincon country that had never once, not one time, laughed, a horse outfit and a working ditch the size of the latter B Wanacrew. A couple of top hands and a wrangler and men to ride the ditch and the fence, and Della had spent the dry summer quietly making her arrangements the way Owen had taught her, a word here, a handshake there, so that when she drove into her own yard the morning after the meeting to hold her outfit together for the fall works, she believed she had 2 riders promised and her hands set, and she found out inside of an hour that she had almost none. She found it out the way you find out most things in a stock town, in pieces, off men who would not meet her eye. Gil Sowerby, who had ridden 2 seasons for Owen, had taken on with the anvil for the fall gather at $40 a month, which was 10 over the wage and about 20 more than the work was worth. The 2 Deaver boys, who she had counted on for the ditch riding, had been told by somebody they respected that a horse outfit, bossed by an unwed girl, on a creek the colonel meant to have, was a good way to work all fall for a wage the bank would eat, and had reconsidered. One by one, all that week, at the feed store and the blacksmith's and on the church step, her crew came apart in her hands. And not one man of them had been threatened, not out loud, because Amos Thorne did not threaten. He hired, he suggested, he let it be understood. And by the following Saturday the word had gone all up and down the Rincon that riding for the Ballard girl was a thing a sensible man did not do, and the Ballard girl had, by her own count, 3 people left in the whole country who had not been bought away or scared off. An old stove upstore widow at the crossroads, a Mexican horseman no Anglo outfit would pay a fair wage, and a cashiered cavalry farrier the county already blamed for one Ballard's death. Meadow Riel was the horseman, and he was the best one in the territory, and he could not draw a top hand's pay anywhere on the Rincon for the one reason that had nothing to do with his hands. He was a quiet, deliberate, iron-gray vaquero of about 45 who had come up out of the Nuevo Mexico country before the war and stayed, and he had forgotten more about a horse and a rope and dry country stock than the Deaver boys would ever learn. And Owen had hired him segundo at the same wage as any white man on the place, and, as Meadow told it, never once made a speech about it. He was in the saddle shed working a rawhide riata when Della came in out of the heat that Saturday, and he did not look up from the braiding, and he said, before she could open her mouth, I heard, "You come to tell me to take an anvil wage before the door shut. I will save you the trouble. I am not going." He set the riata down and looked at her then, level and dark. Don Owen paid me like a man for 11 years. I do not know how to be worth less than that all of a sudden, just because he is gone. I will stay for the $1 a day, and I will stay for nothing if it comes to that. And I will tell you the one true thing nobody at that meeting told you, which is that you have one horse on this place with the bottom to carry you clear across this country in a bad night, and the country told you he is a plow horse. He picked the riata back up. So, where do you want to start? Della Ballard stood in the warm leather smell, with the dust of the road still on her, and she came nearer to weeping at that plain speech than she had come at the burying. And she did not, because that was a rule she had. We start, she said, by hiring the people the country threw away. They're the only ones left whose wages Thorne never troubled to buy, and the only ones who know what it costs to be judged by the one thing about you nobody bothered to look past. Meadow nodded slow, as though she had finally said a sensible thing. "Then you best go see Wade Amory first," he said, "and get the worst of it behind you. Everybody else will be easier after." She went to Wade Amory last in her own mind, which is to say she had thought of him first the night her crew fell apart, and had spent a week finding reasons not to, because going to Wade Amory meant sitting a horse in the yard of the man the country said had killed her father, and asking him to ride for her. That was the whole cruel shape of it, and she did not pretend to herself it was any other shape. Wade Amory had been the farrier and the horse doctor who set Owen Ballard's rigging the morning Owen died. Wade Amory had shod that horse and checked that saddle and cinched that cinch with his own hands at first light, the way he had 1,000 mornings, and when they found Owen a mile down the flooded arroyo with the cinch parted and the saddle turned, the country, which had a rich man quietly suggesting it and a cheap answer ready to hand, had decided that the drunk old cavalry smith had set a rotten cinch in a bad tree and pitched a good man into a flash flood, and Wade Amory, being the kind of man he was, worn thin and gone quiet and half the time in a bottle, had never once stood up in a saloon and told it back. He had been drummed out of the cavalry years before that over a matter that was mostly another man's fault and partly his own temper, and he had drifted into the Rincon country, doctoring horses and mending gear. And after Owen, he had drifted about as far down as a man drifts, and still gets up in the morning. She found him in the shade of a lean to up a dry draw, mending a pack saddle with his coat off and his gray-shot hair in his eyes, and he straightened when she rode into the yard and stood holding an awl and looked at her without surprise, as though he had been expecting her for a week, which perhaps he had. "Mr. Amory," she stayed up on copper, because a thing like this is easier said from a horse. "I've a senior water right to hold over the drought and a contest to answer at the adjudication, and a note that eats my outfit if I lose." Thorne's bought off or scared off every rider in the country. "I've a horseman, a storekeeper, a dead man's tally book, and no farrier, and no second hand. I'm told you were the finest hand with a horse and a shoe and a hurt leg that ever came into this country before they hung my father's cinch around your neck, and I'm told most of what they hung there was a lie." He was quiet a moment, and then he set the awl down on the bench, careful, and said the thing she had come there, braced to hear him not say. "It wasn't a lie that your father died on rigging I set that morning, Miss Ballard, whatever else." His voice was low and even, and it cost him. "I cinched that cinch. I've cinched it in my sleep every night for 2 years. I don't know to this day how it parted, and there's not a soul in this country believes it parted honest, and I stopped trying to make them a long time back. So before you say another word, you best hear me say that one. Because I'll not take a wage off Owen Ballard's girl under any softer accounting than the true one. I set the rigging. He died. That's the fact the rest has got to be built on, or not at all." Della Ballard looked at him a long moment from the back of the scorned horse, two of the country's guilty verdicts sitting there in the hot yard looking at each other, and then she said the thing she had ridden a week's worth of nerve to say. "My father bred a horse this whole country swears is a worthless scrub, because he took the trouble to breed for the one thing they were all too proud to look for. I've had 2 years to learn that the country'll blame the cheapest thing standing when a rich man wants it blamed. It blamed the horse. It blamed you. It blamed a drink my father never took." She let that sit. Owen set that same cinch 10,000 times, and it never parted once. It parted the one night the anvil wanted him under the water at their dam. I don't know yet how to prove it. But I know it the way I know my own hands, and I think, Wade Amory, that under everything you know it too, and have been calling it your fault, because a guilty man can at least sleep, and a robbed one just lies there. I'm not offering you a wage I can pay yet. I'm offering you the one thing Thorne can't, which is a chance to be in the yard the day the truth comes out, in front of every man that crossed the street on you. I'd be obliged if you'd come farrier and second for me." He was still a long moment, looking not at her but at the big red horse she sat, at the plain honest head and the deep chest and the quiet eye, and something in his own worn face moved. "That the cold-blood stud," he said. It was not a question. The one they all say Owen wasted 30 years breeding for nothing. The same. He never wasted a day. Wade Amory reached down and picked his coat up off the bench and shrugged into it, and that was the whole of his saying yes. He never did say it in words, then or later. "I shod cavalry remounts 11 years," he said, settling the coat. "Fine-blooded horses, most of 'em, and I buried a troop's worth of 'em on hard marches account of somebody bought speed when he should have bought bottom. A horse built like that one is what you pray for, when the pretty ones are all blown and down and there's 40 miles left to go. Your father knew a thing this country's too rich and too green to learn." He looked up at her, and there was something bleak and steadying in it. "You want to hold a water right nobody believes is yours, on the strength of a horse nobody believes is worth $1, against a man that already killed one Ballard and hung it on me. Miss Ballard, I don't guess there's a job in the territory I'm fitter for. When do we start?" They started the way you start anything in a drought, which is with the water, and the water was the whole of it. A senior right in a prior appropriation country is a simple hard thing. The first man to take water out of a stream and put it to honest use owns that much of the stream forever, ahead of every man who came after, first in time and first in right, and in a wet year it means nothing, because there is water for all, and in a dry year it means everything, because when the creek falls, the junior rights go dry first, and the senior right takes its full measure to the last, though every man below it burns. Owen Ballard had driven a notched cottonwood post at the point of diversion, the spring of 1869, with the date cut into the wood with his own knife, and had dug the Ballard ditch with a walking plow and a scraper and his own back, and had turned Rincon water down it onto his hay meadow every season for 17 years, and written every turning of it in the tally book. And that post, and that ditch, and that book made Della, in the eye of the law that was coming to the county seat in 90 days, the oldest and best water on the creek, and the last thing standing between Amos Thorne and the whole of Rincon. The Anvil's own rights were junior, filed years after Owen's, worth nothing against his in a dry year. Unless the court could be brought to rule that the Ballard ditch had been abandoned, its water no longer put to beneficial use, in which case the senior right lapsed, and the Anvil's junior right jumped to the head of the creek, and the latter B went dry forever, and the note fell due on a ranch that could not raise a blade of hay. That was the game, though Della did not yet see the whole board. To keep her right, she had to keep her ditch running, and her meadow watered, and her stock alive through the worst drought in the country's memory, 90 days, on a creek that was failing by the day, and prove it done in an open court, or lose everything her father had driven a stake for in the wet spring of a year most of these men could not remember. So the outfit made a summer of it out of the people the country had thrown away. Meadow Rail rode the dry country before dawn and after dark, moving the thin cattle by night to save them the killing heat, reading the failing grass the way another man reads a book. And it was Meadow who kept the tally honest, so many head this week, so many the next. The count dropping slow and steady as the drought took its toll the way a drought does. Wade Amory shod the whole using string, and doctored the drought-sick stock, and once he had a shoeing hammer in his hand and a horse's foot between his knees, straightened up an inch at a time out of 2 years of drink and blame into a man again, because a man the country has written off will sometimes stand up straight for a horse when he cannot stand up straight for himself. And Della kept the book. Every night at the kitchen table by the lamp she wrote the day into Owen's tally book under his own last entries. The water turned down the ditch and the acres watered, and the head worked and the head lost, in her own steady hand below her father's, because he had taught her that a book kept daily and honestly, run by run and head by head, is the one witness in a dry country that cannot be bought or scared or dried out. And she meant to have that witness whole and dated for the day the court came, whatever else the drought took from her. It was in the plain daily work of that dry summer, and not in any one dramatic hour, that the country first had its chances to see what Owen Ballard had bred, and went right on, refusing to see. The neighborhood still threw its scattered drought-thin cattle together twice that season to sort the brands, the little outfits and the big. And at the gather the anvil hands rode in on their fine-blooded horses and cut the cool of the morning like a bright knife, all flash and reach and daylight. And they sat their saddles and looked down the fence at Della Ballard's big coarse red stud in her. Plain deep built home-bred geldings and said the things such men say. There goes Owen's plow team. Reckon she'll break them to a lister come fall, when the banks took the outfit. A man could hang a hame off that stud and never miss the collar. And Della heard the whole of it, because they meant her to, and said nothing, because the afternoon always said it for her. For a blooded horse cuts a brave figure till about 10 o'clock of a hot day, and then the sun stands up hard, and the miles pile on, and the water holes come far between, and one by one through the killing heat of the afternoon, the fine anvil horses slicked dark with sweat, and soured and shortened up, and had to be spelled and led, their riders catching fresh mounts twice before dark. And through all of it the big red stud and the plain Ballard geldings worked on, dry and steady and honest, holding the herd through the worst of the day when the daylight horses were all blown and down. So that more than one anvil man, had he been the kind to learn a thing that cost him a belief he was fond of, might have seen by sundown exactly which horses had carried the work. Not one of them was that kind. They rode home in the cool of the evening on their second fresh horses talking about the plow team, and Della rode home in the dark on the same red stud she had caught before daylight, and wrote the day's work into the book, and let the country go on being a first-mile country just as long as it pleased, because she knew, the way her father had taught her to know it, that a last mile was coming for every soul in it. And the water held, for a while, thin but honest, Rincon Creek falling, but still falling into the Ballard ditch and out onto the Ballard meadow the way it had for 17 years, until the last week of that hot September, when it began to fail in a way that no drought Della had ever seen made it fail. A creek dries from the sky down. It falls and warms and slows and shrinks to a chain of pools, and then to a dark, damp thread, and then to cracked mud. And it does it evenly, from the top of the drainage to the bottom, the way heat takes a country. But the Rincon did not fail that way that week. It failed from her headgate up suddenly, in a night. The ditch running a good thin honest stream one evening, and by the next a bare trickle, and by the third bone-dry cracking mud, while below her on the creek there was still, when she rode down to look, a little water moving. Water does not run uphill, and a drought does not skip a mile of creek and take only the Ballard ditch. And Della Ballard sat her big red horse in the dry bed of her own ditch in the last light, and understood, cold, that what was drying her out was not the sky. She rode up the creek in the gray before dawn to find it, Copper picking his way steady up the dry stony bed while the light came, and she found it 3 miles above her point of diversion, where the creek came down out of the breaks through a narrow place, the anvil grass closed around on both sides. There was a dam there that had not been there in the spring. A great new mounded thing of brush and earth and freighted stone thrown clear across the narrows in the weeks the whole country was watching her at the meeting, and not up here, backing the last of the drought creek into a wide brown reservoir that lay flat and stolen under the dawn, and set in the base of it, where a low gate let a measured mockery of a stream dribble on down toward her dry ditch, was a headgate of new forged iron, and across the headgate, holding it near shut, was a heavy chain and a padlock. The anvil had not waited on the drought to dry her out. The anvil had taken the creek in the night, above her senior right, and locked it, and left the drought to take the blame. Della sat copper a long time in the cold dawn, looking at the chained iron gate and the flat brown water behind it, and she did the thing she did when a thing frightened her, which was arithmetic, out loud, low, the way Owen had taught her. A drought takes a creek from the top down and takes it from everybody, she said to the horse and to the gray light. This took my ditch from the bottom up and took it from me alone. That is not weather. A man built that in the dark while the county laughed at me 30 miles off, and a man hung a lock on it, and a lock is a thing with a key, and a key is a hand, and a hand has a name. She reached down and laid her split brown hand on the great warm plain neck of the horse the country would not give $1 for. They mean to dry the meadow so the court'll call my water abandoned. They mean the drought to sign it. And a chained gate, copper, is the one thing in all of this a man can carry into a courtroom and set on the table and make it say out loud that the creek didn't quit, it was took. She had come up the creek that morning a woman fighting a drought. She rode back down it a woman fighting a robbery, which is a different weather, and the second is more use in a dry country than the first. She did not tear the dam out, though her hands wanted to, and Meadows wanted to worse, and Wade said flatly that 3 men and a wagon jack could open that headgate in a night and let the creek run home where it belonged. She would not, and she made them all see why, at the kitchen table by the tally book's light, and it was the first hard, clear look any of them got at the shape of the thing Thorne had built. The minute I lay a hand on that dam, I'm the lawbreaker, she said. That's the trap, don't you see it? He builds an illegal dam above a senior right, which is a plain wrong the court would make him tear out in a day if it ever saw it standing, so he wants me to tear it out myself in the dark. Then it's not his illegal dam anymore. It's my trespass and my destruction of his improvement, and the sheriff's after the spinster that damaged Anvil property. And the water's still gone, and the court never sees the lock at all. No, the lock stays on. The dam stays up. It stays up in front of witnesses, dated and drawn and sworn to, till I can walk a judge up this creek in his own mind and show him a senior right dried out by a chained gate a rich man's own hand holds the key to. The water's the hostage, but the dam is the confession, long as we leave it standing to be read. So the latter B did the hardest thing there is, which is to be robbed slowly and in the open and hold still and keep the record, and it near broke them. The meadow browned and cracked with the ditch gone dry. The cattle, cut off from the creek water above and driven to the ranch tank below, drank the tank down toward mud. And then one bad morning, Meadow came in from the tank white around the mouth and said a thing was wrong with the water. And there was. The tank had been fouled in the night. Some poison or some carcass worked into it up the inflow, and the stock that had drunk there stood humped and sick along the fence, and 3 good cows went down and did not get up, and there was no proving who. Because stock takes sick in a drought, and cattle die at a low tank, and it was the sort of thing that happens, except that it happened the 1 week the tank was the last water they had. Effie Doone drove out from the Crossroads store that same day with her old wagon loaded with the barrels of her own well water she would not be paid for. An old stove-up bandy-legged widow past 60 who had kept the Crossroads store and its good deep well for 30 years and had told the Anvil to its face what it could do with its offer to buy her out. And she hauled water to the latter beefstock 3 days running on a bad hip and dared any Anvil rider that passed to say a word to her about it, and none did, because there are old women in every dry country that even a cattle king's men know better than to cross. But the message had been sent, and Della read it plain, They were past drawing her out gentle. They had begun to mean her real harm. She understood the whole of it. Finally, the week of the impound, which was the week the map of the thing came clear to her, all at once and cold. A dozen head of ladder B cattle, pushed by the dry tank to drift up the creek toward the smell of the anvil's stolen reservoir, went through a stretch of fence that had been cut in the night. Cut, not down. The wire parted clean and the posts left standing so it would look like her own poor fence had failed, and drifted onto anvil grass. And the anvil gathered them and drove them to the county seat pound and swore a trespass complaint and a bill of damages against the ladder B for its stock running loose on company range, 12 head impounded, a fee against each to get them back, and a black mark sworn onto the county's books against the outfit of the woman who could not even keep her cattle home. Della rode into the pound and looked at her own gaunt cows behind the anvil's rails, and did not rage and did not weep. She did the arithmetic, out loud, low, to Meadow beside her, the way Owen had taught her to do arithmetic when it frightened her. "They don't mean to dry us out," she said. "I've had it half wrong all summer. A man that only wanted the water would dam it and wait. He wouldn't foul a tank and cut a fence and swear a trespass. Too much chance of a court asking why." Thorne means the record. He means for the ladder B to look failed and abandoned and lawless in the county's own books. A dry ditch, dead stock, cattle running loose. A girl that can't hold her ground, so that when the adjudication comes, the judge reads a book full of abandonment and failure, and rules my senior right lapsed for non-use, and hands the head of the creek to the one clean, prosperous outfit standing ready to take it. That's the play. It was never the $800, and it was never even just the water on the day. It's the record. Every dry acre, every fouled cow, every impounded head, every fence they cut, is another line in the county's book that says the Ballard right is abandoned, and the record is what he's really stealing. She looked at Meadow in the hot pound dust, and the terrible part, the part I only just now see, is that we can't beat it by being robbed less carefully. The more we hold still and take it, the more it looks like we've given up and gone. He's built a thing where our every misfortune is our own conviction. But Thorne, in his cold cleverness, had made 2 small mistakes, and Della found the first of them that same afternoon and the second within the month, and they were the mistakes that would in the end undo him, though none of them knew it yet. The first was the lock. A drought is an act of God, and no court can be shown its hand, but the chained iron headgate on the new dam was an act of a man, dated and physical, and holding still to be looked at, and the closed, unforced lock on it was the one hard object in the whole shapeless cruelty of that season that could be carried into a courtroom and made to say out loud that the creek had not quit. It had been shut off by a hand that held the key. Della rode back up to the dam with Meadow and a witness she trusted, old Effie Doone jolting up the dry bed on a lead mule, and she had Meadow file one link of the chain half through and photograph nothing, and take nothing and break nothing, only measure and mark and swear, so that 3 honest people had stood at that dam and seen the lock hang closed and hole across a senior man's water. And then she rode home and worked the very fact of it into the back of Owen's tally book, a chip of the fresh-cut dam brush, a rubbing of the new iron gate's maker's mark, the date and the hour and the names of the 3 who saw it, pressed flat between the last pages like a thing already halfway to being evidence. It was the first time she let herself think the word. And she did not say it out loud, even to Meadow, because a thing like that is safest kept in the book of yourself until the day you need it in the book of the law. The second mistake was older and worse, and it came to her through Wade Amory, one evening at the forge he had set up in her saddle shed, and it was the cinch. Wade had never thrown away the rigging Owen died on. He had kept it 2 years the way a man keeps the thing he believes has damned him, The parted cinch coiled in the bottom of his war bag, and one night, doctoring a drought-cracked hoof by lantern light with Della holding the lamp, he said, not looking up, that he wanted her to see a thing he should have made himself look at square 2 years back, and had been too much a coward and too much in a bottle to. He took the cinch out and laid it on the anvil in the lantern light and made her look at where it had parted, and then he made her look at an honest cinch worn through, one he cut off a foundered horse that week for the purpose, and he showed her what he had known in his hands the whole time and never let his mind say. An honest cinch that gives under a load gives ugly, he said, turning the two of them under the lamp. It frays. The strands let go one at a time and curl back, and the break is ragged, and every strand a different length, because a woven thing under strain tears fiber by fiber. This one, and he held Owen's cinch to the light, parted clean. Straight across, near flat, most of the way through, with the last little bit torn where it finally let go under his weight in the water. That is not a cinch that failed, Miss Ballard. That is a cinch that was cut most of the way through, low down where a hurried man in the dark and a checking hand at dawn would both miss it, and left to hold just long enough to put a man in a flash flood at the worst place on the arroyo, and then let go. I have cut 1,000 of 'em off horses. Leather remembers the knife. I knew it in my hands the morning we found him, and I have spent 2 years drowning the knowing, and I am done drowning it. Somebody cut Owen Ballard's cinch, and I set it on him not knowing. And that is a different sin than the one this country hung on me, and I mean to see it told. And Della Ballard held the lamp steady over the 2 pieces of leather, the honest tear and the clean cut, and folded the second fact in beside the first in the back of her father's book, the robbery of the water and the murder of the man lying quiet together between 2 pages. And she understood that Amos Thorne's whole cold machine was hinged, at the very bottom of it, on things that had been parted clean by a blade, and would remember the blade forever, if she lived to hold them up to a window in front of a judge. After the impound the anvil rode with them, not close, but always there. From the week of the pounded cattle on there were 2 or 3 riders sitting fine-blooded horses on a far rise above the ladder B in the middle distance, watching the outfit work the dry country, making no move, saying nothing. There when the crew rode out in the dark, and there when it came in. A patience that got into the hands worse than any threat. Meto named them los sopilotes, the buzzards. Wade cleaned and loaded an old cavalry carbine and kept it by the forge, and Effie Doone took to driving her water wagon out with a shotgun under the seat and a look on her old face that dared the world. And Della drove herself and the outfit harder and slept lighter and wrote more, because she had understood the one thing that could still beat Thorne, which was that a book kept honestly and daily, and a chained gate left standing to be sworn to, and a cut cinch kept 2 years, were 3 witnesses in the country he could not buy. Poison, cut, or dry out. And she meant to have all 3 ready and whole and dated for the day the court came, whatever else they took from her before then. The man who taught her how to fight with them, and warned her of the last trap coming, she met at the county seat, in the one place in the country, with a printing press and a lawyer's memory in it, and it was not the man she expected. The county paper was the Coronado Clarion, and the person who got it out once a week on a hand press behind the harness shop was a widow named Nettie Vaughn, a spare, dry, straight-backed woman of about 50 who had buried a lawyer husband back in Ohio and come west with his law books and his press and a cough she did not talk about, and who had the sharpest legal mind Della met on the whole Rincon, sharper than any man that wore a coat to the courthouse. She had been watching the Ballard business the way she watched everything, and when Della came into the Clarion office to place a plain, paid notice swearing the state of her ditch for the record, Nettie Vaughn put down her stick of type and looked at her over her spectacles and said the drought had dried up every interesting thing in the county but this one, and made her sit down, and got the whole of it out of her: the meeting, the dam, the lock, the fouled tank, the impound. And she stopped Della only twice. She stopped her the first time at the lock, and her dry voice went sharp and bright, and she laid out the law of it the way only a lawyer's widow, who had read every book in a dead man's office, could lay out a thing. Water in the territory, she said, turned on two words: use and priority, and Thorne was trying to prove the senior right abandoned for non-use, that the ditch had gone dry because Della failed. But a ditch dried because a junior appropriator threw an unlawful dam across the stream above the senior headgate, and locked the gate was not abandoned. It was deprived, and the deprivation was the junior man's own crime, and it perfected the senior right instead of lapsing it, because the water had never once been quit. It had been taken by a hand with no standing in law to touch it. That chained gate is not your failure. It is his felony, standing in iron on public water, dated and locked, with his key in his pocket, she said. A drought can't be argued with. A lock can be subpoenaed. Leave it standing and swear to it, and you haven't lost your water. You've caught him holding it. She stopped Della the second time to tell her the things she had not known and needed to, and it was the shape of the last trap. You had better know how a cold man plays a strong hand, Nettie Vaughn said. He has wired ahead. I have the copy off the operator, who owes me more than he owes the anvil, wired his lawyers at the county seat to prepare a complaint. Not a defense of the dam. A complaint against you. They mean to charge that you, seeing your outfit failing and your note due, went up in the night and damaged the anvil's lawful stock water improvement, and turned the impounded water loose to flood the lower creek and drown out your own trespass, and that the loose ladder B cattle and the whole failure of your outfit are the acts of a desperate woman wrecking a neighbor's property. He means to be the injured man and you the vandal. And the cleverest part, the part that will very nearly work, is that if his men breach that dam themselves some dark night and loose that water down on you, then the dam is down and cannot be shown to a judge standing. And the flood is real and on the record, and there you are, the last one seen near it, holding a grudge and a dry ditch and a due note, looking for all the county exactly like a woman who tore out a dam. He does not need to beat your water right in court. He needs only to make you the criminal before the court ever weighs it. She folded her spectacles, and her worn face had something in it that had not been there when she sat down. A lawyer's widow who had found, at the frayed end of her life in a dry town, one more brief worth arguing. So I am going to print you, Miss Ballard. All of it, this week. Before the adjudication, the dam, the date, the lock, the fouled tank, the cut fence, the cut cinch, the $800 offer, his own wire from his own office, so that when Thorne swears his complaint there is already an account in type in this territory, and telegraphed to the territorial paper besides, that says the Ballard woman told it the other way first, with the dates and the objects and his own hand on the wire. I cannot ride your creek, and I cannot try your case, but by God I can put the truth in type where a judge can read it before the liar opens his mouth. She coughed once into a gray handkerchief and put it away. It is not much. It is what I have left in me to do. She did not know she had all but said a dead man's kind of saying. Della heard it, and did not tell her, and shook her ink-stained hand with both of her own. The man who could read the dam itself and swear to its age and its crime in a language a court would hang a decree on, Nettie Vaughn sent her to next, and he was old Silas Orr, the deputy territorial surveyor, a dry, spectacled, incorruptible old man of about 60, who had run the first government lines through the Rincon country 20 years back, and set the section corners and the water monuments with his own transit, and had never in 40 years signed his name to a survey that was not true, because he had already been offered everything a surveyor can be offered, and had wanted none of it. Silas Orr rode up the creek with Della and Meadow on a gray mule and looked at the Anvil Dam a long time through his old spectacles, and walked its length and dug at its face with a knife, and looked at the fresh axe-cut brush and the new freighted stone and the raw yellow earth not yet crusted by a single rain. And he took out a little notebook and wrote in it. And then he looked at Della with his dry old eyes and said the thing that made half the case. This dam was built this summer, and I will stake my transit on it in any court in the territory, he said. Fresh-cut brush not gone gray, quarried stone with the drill marks bright and unweathered, earth with no rain crust, and no rooted weed on the face of it. You cannot fake the age of a raw dam, any more than you can fake the age of a man. The country writes it on them both. And it stands 3 miles above the diversion point I monumented myself for Owen Ballard's ditch in the fall of '69, which is of record in my own field books and in the land office both, and which makes his right, and now yours. Senior to the Anvils by 17 years, and to this dam by 17 years, and 1 bad summer. A raw dam on public water above a senior right, ma'am, is not a hard thing to read. It is the easiest reading in the world. It says a junior man took what was not his, and dated the taking himself in fresh yellow dirt. He closed his notebook. I will bring my field books and my transit to the county seat, and I will say every word of that under oath. And the man does not live who can shake me off a section corner I set myself. Keep that dam standing, Miss Ballard. It is the best witness on the creek, and it cannot be bribed and it cannot lie, because dirt remembers when it was moved. She had, by the last week of that terrible September, everything she needed to win in an open court, and no open court to bring it to for 60 days, and a cold man 3 miles up the creek who had read the same clock she had, and knew he had to break her, before the court ever sat. And it was into that narrow, deadly stretch of waiting that Amos Thorne, through Culrenning, through the last and worst of it, and it came, as the worst of it always did in that country, in the dark and by the water. Culrenning was the Anvil's range boss and ditch boss both, a spare, pale-eyed, soft-voiced man of about 40 up out of the Nevada brush with no history and a reputation for the work an outfit does not name, and he carried a fine bone-handled skinning knife and a coil of smooth wire and a pair of fence pliers the way another man carries a watch chain. Always oiling or coiling something in his quiet hands, and it was Culrenning who had cut the cinch and chained the gate and fouled the tank and parted the fence, and it was Culrenning who now decided, with the court 60 days off, and the Clarion about to print, that the paper case had gotten too slow, and the thing had best be finished in the old sure way, on the ground, in the black, where no witness lived for 20 miles. They came for the herd on a moonless night in the last of the drought, and they came the way a professional does a thing, with the dark and the ground and the water all on their side and only the horse against them. Della and Meadow and Wade were moving the main gather of the thin cattle down the dry arroyo in the black that night. 300 head, and more strung out along the sandy bottom of the Rincon, toward the one stretch of the home meadow, where a seep still held a little standing water, moving them by night the way they had all that killing summer to save the stock the heat, and it was into the middle of that dark, slow drive, with the cattle strung a half-mile down the deep, dry, sandy channel between its cut clay banks, that the Anvil breached the dam. They had drilled and charged the base of it that same day, and they blew the low center of it out in the dark with a muffled thud that Della felt in the ground before she heard it, and the whole flat brown stolen reservoir, 3 miles of impounded drought creek held back all that dry month, came down the dry Rincon arroyo in a black wall in the dark, onto 300 head of cattle, and 3 riders strung helpless along the very channel her father had drowned in. She heard it before she could see it, a low freight train roar coming down the black cut of the arroyo from above, and she knew in one cold instant the whole of what it was: the dam, the flood, the trap, The same water, in the same channel that had taken Owen. Come now for his daughter and his herd, and meant to leave a wrecked and drowned and scattered outfit, and a torn-out dam, and a last-seen spinster for the county to read exactly one way. The cattle felt it, and began to run in the dark, the deep sandy channel a death trap, with its cut banks too high to climb in most of that half-mile, and there was time for one thing and one thing only, which was to turn the herd up and out of the channel at the single low place in the near bank before the wall of water came down on them, and it was too far ahead in the dark for a fast horse to reach in time, and Della was not on a fast horse, she was on Copper. She put the big red stud down the outside of the running herd in the black at a dead run, the one run he had never been bred or asked for, and he gave her everything a horse can give a rider, and it was enough. Because bottom is not only the wind for the last mile, it is the will that does not quit and does not panic and does not spend itself in one wild bolt. And where a blooded horse would have run itself blind and frantic and fallen in the dark broken channel, the cold-blood stud ran hard and level and honest and sure-footed down that black sand with the flood roaring down behind them both. And he caught the head of the running herd at the low place in the bank, astride before the water, and Della turned the leaders up and out of the channel, with all her weight thrown into it, and her voice gone raw. And Copper set his great haunches into the loose sand, and held the turn, held it against 300 panicked head, trying to run on down the channel into the flood, held it the way a bridge holds, plain and unbeautiful and immovable, until the whole running herd broke up out of the death channel over the low bank onto the high safe ground, and the black wall of water went roaring by below them, through the empty arroyo where the cattle had been a half-minute before. He turned the herd out of the flood, the horse they would not give $1 for. He held 300 head on his own feet and his own bottom and his own refusal to quit, in the one dark and the one deep water that had already killed the man who bred him. And he brought them out. But it cost, the way that country made everything cost. It cost Wade Amory, who had been low down the channel bringing the drags and had to run his own horse up a cut bank at the last second and took a fall when the bank sloughhed under them, and came up with his good horse lamed and his own left arm broken clean below the elbow, sitting in the wet sand at the edge of the receding water gray-faced and cradling it and swearing softly and steadily at the dark. It cost cattle, 30 head, and more caught in the low channel below the turn, and carried down and drowned and scattered miles down the Rincon before dawn. Another black line for the county's book, more loose Ballard stock for the anvil to swear a trespass on. And it cost the horse. Della did not find the whole of it until the gray dawn came, and Meadow lit a lantern. Because Copper had said nothing, had stood the rest of that black night, holding the turned herd bunched on the high ground with the thing done to him, and never once faltered. But when the light came, she found a long raking tear down the point of his near shoulder, cut to the muscle and crusted black. A wire cut, from a strand Renning's men had strung low across the one low place in the bank they had reckoned she might try to turn the herd, meaning the wire to cut and pile any horse that reached it, and Copper had hit that wire at a dead run turning the herd, and had torn straight through it, and turned them anyway and never quit the turn, and had stood the rest of the night bleeding quiet in the dark with the whole herd safe behind him. Della stitched him that morning by full light on the bank of the drained arroyo, kneeling in the wet sand with the drowned water still standing in the low channel below, and Wade Amory gray and splinted against a cottonwood, and Meadow holding the lantern and the great red head, and she did it the way her father had taught her at 11, with a curved needle and a length of waxed thread. 16 stitches to close the long tear, and the big stud stood for it with his head down and his warm breath going slow against her back, and never flinched from the needle. She talked to him the whole time, low, the way you talk to steady yourself and not the horse, telling him he was worth the whole anvil and the man that owned it, telling him her father had been right and the country wrong, that there was more in the bottom of him than in all the fine-blooded speed in the territory, and somewhere in the middle of it, 16 stitches into the shoulder of a horse the county had told her to geld and harrow. Della Ballard finally, quietly, kneeling in the wet sand with her hands full of thread and blood, cried, the first time since the burying. Cried for Owen and the flooded arroyo, and the 2 dry springs, and the fouled tank, and the broke-armed man against the tree, and the torn brave horse, and the 30 drowned cattle, and the whole cold weight of the year. Cried it all out silent, with her forehead against the warm red neck, while she tied off the last stitch, and then she wiped her face on her sleeve and stood up and was done with it. Because there was a broke man to get to a doctor, and a scattered herd to account for, and a court 60 days off, and a woman who has cried her one cry is not weaker for it, but lighter, and she knew the difference now. Wade Amory had watched the last of it from against his cottonwood, gray with his broke arm, and when she stood he said, low, so Meadow would not hear, "That's the best piece of field doctoring I ever saw, and the biggest heart I ever saw stand it. That horse ran a race tonight he was never bred to run and won it, because your father bred the one thing into him that a race can't teach and money can't buy, which is a horse that won't quit a job half done." He paused and worked his good hand once against the splint and said the rest of it, which was as near as Wade Amory ever came in all that year to the thing under everything. "Your father left you a great horse, Miss Ballard, but that horse didn't turn 300 head off a flood in the dark tonight by himself. You did. On his back. In the black. Don't you let this country tell it any other way, and don't you tell it that way to yourself." And then, because it was more than he had said in 2 years and more than either of them could yet hold, he let Meadow help him up and turned it into work, and they got him down to the county seat to a doctor for the arm, and the drowned cattle counted, and the herd, what was left of it, back onto the home ground, and behind them the breached dam stood open and empty and torn, exactly as Nettie Vaughn had foreseen, and the first great blue norther of that killing winter was already piling itself black over the divide, coming down out of the north on a cold wind that had not been in the country an hour before. Quietly, on time, to finish everything the flood had begun. They could not get Wade Amory to the county seat doctor the near way, because the near way crossed the Rincon at the wagon ford below the home meadow, and the creek that would not run a foot of honest water down her ditch all that summer was running now, running high and brown and wrong, the whole stolen reservoir the anvil had loosed in the night, come down the country at once, and standing in the low crossings. And a flood that falls on ground 3 months baked to brick does not sink into it, it stands on top of it. And where it stood over the old ford it had turned the hard bottom to a bog of quicksand that would take a wheel to the hub and a horse to the belly and not give either back. Della drove the light wagon down to the ford in the gray morning with Wade White, and one armed on the seat beside her, and her father's book, and the cut cinch, and the whole of her wrapped-up proof kept dry in oilcloth in the box behind. Because a woman going for a doctor carries what she cannot leave, and she looked at the brown water standing over the swallowed crossing and knew the team could not take a loaded wagon through it and live. Meadow came down off the bench to say they would go around, the long way, half a day lost with a broke man beside her, and Della said no, and unhitched the near-wheeler, and led Copper down out of the horse pasture to the water's edge, and put him to the wagon tongue alone. A blooded horse will not pull in quicksand. It feels the false bottom go under it, and it fights and lunges and drowns itself, and everything behind it in one blind minute of panic. The cold-blood stud walked into the standing brown water to his chest, and felt the bottom take his legs, and did not fight it. He leaned, slow and low and patient, into the collar the way he had leaned into 1,000 honest loads. And he found what footing the quicksand would give him a foot at a time, and took it, and held it, and leaned again. and where a fine horse's panic would have buried them all he brought the wagon, and the broke man and the oilcloth wrapped proof through the swallowing ground at a walk, one deliberate sucking stride after another, up the far cutbank and onto honest gravel. Blowing and dark, with mud to the shoulder, and no more trouble than a horse coming in off a long circle. Della stood on the far bank with the creek dropping off her skirts and looked at the plain red horse the whole country had priced at $1, standing hip-shot in the mud with a saved man and a saved wagon, and a book that could dry up a cattle king behind him. And she thought her father must have known, breeding him all those patient years, that there would come a gray morning exactly like this one, and had bred her the horse to meet it before she was ever old enough to know she would need him. The last piece of it came to her out of that opening storm 2 nights later, on a wind-broke horse, and it was a young man. A boy the country would have called him, and she would not before it was over. He came up the ladder B road in the first hard sleet of the norther, and sat his blown horse at the edge of the lamplight, with his thin face pinched and gray and scared and set, and Della walked out to him before any of the others could, and stood at his stirrup looking up. "I couldn't stay, Miss Ballard." The words came out of him in a rush, the way a young man confesses. "Name's Tyree Hale. I tend stock and ride ditch for the anvil, out of the upper camp, on account of it was the only wage in this country and I got no people. Buried my folks off a wagon 2 years back, and been on my own since I was 17. And I've held horses and dug where Renning told me to dig all summer, and told myself it weren't my business what the men done. And then I helped throw that dam and chain that gate, and I was holding the horses the night they drilled it and blew it out onto your cattle, and I heard Renning laugh when the water went, and I seen a man string that wire low across the bank where he figured you'd turn 'em, on purpose, to pile your horse, and I couldn't, Miss Ballard. I couldn't stand in the dark and hold horses for men drowning cattle and trying to drown a woman the same way they done her pa. My own ma set store by doing a thing square when I was small, and I just couldn't no more." His voice cracked clean across. "And there's worse, and you got to know it. I heard Renning tell 2 of 'em today to be ready to swear they seen you up at that dam with a jack and a shovel the night it went. They're fixing to swear you tore it out yourself. And I know where the tally is, the anvil's own book, up at the upper camp, where Renning wrote down every head he cut out of your gather and drove off and sold south under an anvil road brand all summer. The stock this country thinks the drought took, I come to tell you, and to give myself up to the law after, whatever it costs me, because I threw that dam and held them horses, and that makes me one of them, and I'd sooner stand up honest in a court than winter warm on an anvil wage one more night." Della Ballard reached up and put her hand on the young man's knee, and every soul at the lamplit door went still to hear her. "You didn't hold horses, Tyree Hale," she said, gently. "You rode a broke horse into the front of a blizzard to bring a woman the truth and to give up your own neck for it, and you couldn't hold them any longer because your mother raised you square. That's not what one of Renning's men does. That's the bravest thing I've heard tell of any man doing on this whole creek, and I'll say so to the judge with my hand on the book. Now get down and get to that fire. You're home." And Tyree Hale got down off the wind-broke horse and stumbled to the door, and Effie Doone, who had come out to help hold the outfit through the storm, put a plate in his hands and more when he wept into the first one, and said nothing, the way she had said nothing to 100 cold strays over 30 years. That night, by the tally book's light, with the sleet ticking hard at the window, and the northern building black outside, and the adjudication 3 days off at the county seat, Della and Meadow and Wade, his arm in a sling now, and old Silas Orr, who had ridden out ahead of the storm to bring his field books, made the hard plan, and it was the horse's plan in the end. The thing was 90 days come to its point, and the point was a knife's edge. The adjudication would sit at the county seat courthouse in 3 days, and would settle the whole creek by priority, and to stand before it with her dated book and her survey and her witnesses and win was one thing, but to get there was another. Because Amos Thorne had spent the last of his cold cleverness closing every door but the one he meant her to fail at. He had bought the stage line to lay off its run over the divide for the winter, so there was no coach. He had, Nettie Vaughn's operator swore, arranged to have the single telegraph wire over the pass cut the night before the hearing, so there was no wiring the proof or the witnesses ahead. And 110 miles of hard country lay between the Ladder B and the county seat courthouse, over the Rincon Divide and the High Pass, with the first great blizzard of the winter coming down over the whole of it, and the Anvil's lawyers already at the county seat, and the Anvil's fast-blooded relay horses staged along the low road ready to carry Thorne's complaint, and his sworn witnesses in comfort the moment the storm and the cut wire and the closed stage left the spinster stranded 30 miles from a friend with a book she could not deliver. "He's said it so I can't get there," Della said, low over the book and the lamp. No stage, no wire, 110 miles and a blizzard to seal the pass. He means the court to sit and the Ballard woman to never show, and my right decreed abandoned for, that I did not appear to defend it, and his complaint sworn against a woman that isn't there to answer, and it's clean and lawful and cold, and it will work. Unless somebody carries this book and these field books over the divide through that storm and lays them on the judge's table in 3 days' time. And there is exactly one horse in this territory bred for 110 miles of blizzard, when every fast-blooded horse the Anvil owns will be blown and down and quit in the first 20. He's ours, and the country priced him at $1. She looked around the lamplit table, at the broke farrier and the gray old surveyor, and the iron vaquero and the old widow, and the boy she would not let be a boy. Silas rides his mule down the low road slow and safe with a certified copy, and gets there if the weather lets him, so there's 2 chances. Meadow takes Tyree and rides up to the upper camp in the storm while the Anvils run for shelter, and brings out that road brand tally and the drove stock, the proof of the rustling, before Renning can burn it. And I ride Copper over the divide, the short hard highway, through the norther, with the true book and the cut cinch and Silas's field notes. And I put them on that table the hour before Amos Thorne means to have me defaulted and arrested, and I let him swear whatever he likes to a courtroom that's looking at the water he said I never used, and the dam he said I tore out standing open in Silas Orr's own photographs. Wade Amory looked at her a long moment across the lamp, his arm in its sling, and then he almost smiled, the second time that year, and said, Owen would have said the same. And I can't fork a horse with this wing to ride with you, which is the bitterest thing that's happened to me in a hard year. So you listen to me instead. Ride him slow the first 80 and fast the last 30. Don't let your own fears spend him early, because a cold-blood's whole gift is he'll give you the last mile if you don't throw away the first. Save the bottom for the top of the pass. And trust the horse on the ground you can't see. Your father wrote that in the front of that book, Trust the Horse on the Water, and he was writing about tonight. He just didn't live to know it. Now go while the going's only bad. It'll be worse. They saw her off in the black cold an hour before that dawn, the whole thrown-away outfit standing in the wind at the horse pasture gate while she cinched the big stud and tied her father's oilcloth-wrapped book, and the cut cinch and Silas Orr's field notes high and dry behind the cantle. Meadow Rael held the horse's head and said a thing over him in Spanish, low, that she did not ask him to give her in English, and then said in English only, Go with the horse, trust him past where you can trust yourself. Effie Doone was already gone on ahead up the pass road in her water wagon with a keg and a lantern and her old shotgun over every objection Della had made. Because an old woman on a bad hip had decided there would be a light burning on that divide that night if she had to freeze holding it up herself. Wade Amory could not fork a horse to ride with her, and it was plainly the bitterest hour of a bitter year for him. He checked with his one good hand the cinch she had already checked, once, out of habit, and out of a thing he did not have the words for, and stepped back, and said only, "Ride him slow and bring him home." And Tyree Hale, who had not slept, swung the gate. Della Ballard looked once at the black wall of the norther, standing up over the divide where she had to go, and once at the lamplit faces of the 4 people the county had thrown away, who were all she had and were enough. And she gathered the reins and turned the red stud north into the storm. The blizzard came down off the divide before dawn on the day Della started, not the soft feathering snow of a Christmas card, but the killing kind. The great blue norther of that hard winter, a horizontal white roar of wind and ground blizzard that took the world away 30 feet past a horse's ears and dropped the cold far through zero and kept dropping. The storm that in that killing winter men would call the die-up for a generation, that caught the open-range cattle in their tens of thousands drifting blind before it into the fence corners and the frozen draws, and ended the whole reign of the great open-range outfits in one white week. And into that white nothing Della Ballard put the scorned cold-blood stud and rode 110 miles for the water and the ranch and her father's cleared name, and the horse carried her through. It was the bottom that did it, in the end, the very thing the country had priced at $1. A fine-blooded horse is a bonfire, all speed and heart in the first cool miles, and nothing left when the fuel is gone. The cold blood was a bank of hard coal, slow to warm and near impossible to spend, and he ate the first 80 miles at a steady reaching walk and jogged through the building storm the way Wade had told her, level and honest and tireless, breaking his own trail through the deepening drift with his great chest, feeling the buried road under his feet where no eye could read it, untroubled by the screaming white, because a plain horse asks less of its eyes than a fine one does, and had bottom enough not to burn its nerve on fear. She fed him what she could at the one-line camp still standing, and let him blow and rode on into the dark and the worse cold on the high divide, and she drove by the pull of the ground and the memory of a country she had ridden all her life, and could not now see a length of the horse ahead, and where the pass fell away in the white she found. When she had all but given the last of herself to the cold, the one warm gold point of light in all that roaring white world, old Effie Doone, who had jolted her water wagon up to the high pass ahead of the storm and stood the whole night in the lee of a rock, swinging a lantern high into the norther to mark the one place a horse could get down off the divide. An old stove-up woman holding a light against a killing storm for a girl, and a horse the county laughed at, because that is what the thrown-away people of that country did for one another when the rich men were home by their fires. And Copper came down off the divide toward the swung gold lantern, with his flanks white with rime, and his great heart still honest, and his bottom not yet spent. Because Owen Ballard had bred him for exactly and only this, the last hard mile, when the day has turned to kill you both, and he made the low country, and he made the county seat, and he made it whole, an hour before Amos Thorne's clean cold trap was set to close on a woman who wasn't there. Thorne was at the courthouse, because a proud man cannot stay away from the place his enemy will be either broken or dangerous, and he had made, with his lawyer's help, his last and cleverest arrangement. He had a complaint sworn and a deputy ready, charging the Ballard woman with destroying the Anvil's lawful stock water dam and turning a flood loose on the lower creek to drown out her own trespass, and with letting her stock run wild on company range all season, a desperate failing woman wrecking a good neighbor's improvements, and the proof of it was to be that she had not even appeared to answer the water suit, having fled her ruined outfit, and that the dam lay breached, and her cattle lay scattered and drowned exactly as a woman's spite would leave them. It was, laid flat before the court, the most beautiful trap Amos Thorne had ever built, for on its face a dam breached in the night, and a herd drowned in the arroyo, and a senior right holder who did not come to defend it, looked exactly like the ruin of a woman who had cracked and destroyed and run. And then the courtroom door opened on the storm, and Della Ballard walked in out of the blizzard, with the ice not yet melted from her coat, and her father's tally book against her breast, and laid it wet and whole on the clerk's table, and the whole clean trap hung fire in the air. "I'm sorry it's come to this, Della," Thorne said, low. And the terrible cold thing was that some rind of him a little meant it. Destroying a water improvement and flooding a creek is a serious matter, a prison matter. But I'll speak for leniency, on account of your father, if you'll sign the outfit over now, and let it be settled quiet, before you make it worse. He was being reasonable. "No," Della said. "We'll let it be read in the open, Colonel, before witnesses, the way you like a thing done. I'll trust the wood and the water and the book." And she asked the court, in a voice that carried out into the stormy street, to send for the deputy surveyor, and to let the adjudication proceed on the record she had ridden 110 miles through a killing storm to lay before it, and Judge Cyrus Tandy, who was, as God and Amos Thorne's cold luck would have it, the very judge who had taken his cigar out of his mouth at a water meeting a lifetime ago to study a small brown woman doing sums out loud, looked at the ice on her coat and the book on his clerk's table, and said, dry as a dry creek, that his court had all winter, and the lady had plainly come a long way to be heard, and that they would hear her. They held the whole of it over the next 2 days in the county seat courthouse, with the norther howling white against the windows, and the whole country came, those that could get in through the storm, and it was as public as anything Amos Thorne had ever staged, only this time he was not staging it. Old Silas Orr took the stand first, and laid his 40 years and his field books on the rail, and swore the Ballard right senior by 17 years off his own monuments of 1869, and swore the Anvil Dam raw and new and unlawful off the bright drill marks, and the uncrusted earth, and the ungrayed brush, and no lawyer in that courtroom could shake a section corner the old man had set. With his own transit, because dirt remembers when it was moved, and Silas Orr remembered every corner he had ever set. Then the court's own water referee, a spare, unbuyable man named Loyal Beck, was given Owen Ballard's dated tally book, and read it aloud in part, run by run and season by season and head by head. 17 years of water turned honestly down a ditch, and cattle worked, and even the losses set down square. The drought's toll and the fouled tank and the drowned 30 all entered plain in a woman's steady hand below a dead man's. And he looked up and said, in the dry voice of a man reading a fact off an object, that it was the best kept and most continuous record of beneficial use he had seen in the territory, and he had audited 100, and that a right is abandoned only when its owner quits it, and no one who ever quit her water had kept a book like this one. Whatever dried this ditch, Your Honor, it was not the woman who wrote this, he said, because she never once stopped using it, counting it, and swearing to every drop the law let her take. And then Della laid the chained lock she had worked off the headgate on the clerk's table, closed and whole and never forced, beside Silas Orr's photographs of the dam standing raw across her senior water, and the referee took it up and turned it over, and said the thing that broke the drought defense in half, this lock was never opened. A creek that dried in a drought needs no lock. Water was held here, behind iron, by a hand that kept the key above a senior right, in the worst dry summer in the country's memory. That is not a drought, Your Honor. That is a theft, and here is the padlock off the theft, and it has a keyhole, and somewhere there is a key, and I should be very interested to learn whose pocket it rode in. After that it came apart for Amos Thorne, the way a dam comes apart in the dark, all at once and in every direction. Della put on young Tyree Hale, who told it with his hat in his hands and his voice shaking, and never once looked at Thorne, how Renning had them throw the dam and chain the gate, how he had held the horses the night they drilled it and blew it onto the herd, how he had watched a man string the wire low to pile her horse on purpose, how Renning had ordered 2 men to swear falsely that they saw her tear the dam out herself, and how he had ridden a broke horse into a blizzard to give it all up and take his medicine, and the court, looking at that thin young man choosing to stand up honest and hang rather than winter warm on an anvil wage, understood it was hearing the truth. She put on Meadow Rael, grave and unshakable, who had ridden up through the storm to the emptied upper camp and brought down the anvil's own hidden tally in Renning's own hand, the secret book of every ladder behead Renning had cut from her gathers all summer and driven south under a fresh anvil road brand, and sold, the stock the whole county had believed the drought took. And Meadow laid beside it a length of the same smooth wire cut clean, and snagged frozen on its barb, a torn strip of pale gray wool, ripped from the skirt of a coat the whole creek had seen 100 times on Cull Renning's back. And then Wade Amory came forward with his arm in its sling, and laid Owen Ballard's cinch on the rail, beside an honest one worn through, and held them to the courtroom window, where the white stormlight came in, and showed the room what leather does not forget, the honest strap frayed ragged and every strand a different length, where a woven thing tears under load, and Owen's parted clean and flat and near square across, cut most of the way through low down, and torn only the last little bit where it let go under a drowning man's. "Wait," and Wade Amory said, in a voice that shook and did not break, "A load frayed this one, and a knife parted this one, and no man alive can argue them into the same wound. Somebody cut Owen Ballard's cinch the morning he died, low where a hurried checking hand would miss it, and left it to hold just long enough to put him in the flood at the worst place, and I set it on him not knowing. And I have let this country hang his death on me for 2 years, and it was never my rotten leather, your honor. It was a cut, and it was murder, and it wore anvil colors." And the courtroom made a sound then, low, like wind, and Cull Renning, who might have brazened out any one thing, could not sit still under all of them at once, and got up in the middle of it, and walked out of the courtroom and out of the county seat, and out of the territory, and was not seen in the Rincon country again, which the grand jury took, correctly, for an answer. And while the courtroom was still roaring, the last of it came in off the storm on a half-frozen rider, the news that the norther had emptied the open range. Thorne, too proud and too sure of his fine stock to drive them to shelter and eat the cost, had left the anvil's whole-blooded herd, and his prized fast horses out on the open grass, to ride out a storm the way his money always had, and the great Diop had caught them where they stood, the fine-blooded cattle, and the weedy fast horses that could show any daylight a man wanted in a quarter mile. Dash and had never once in their pampered lives been asked to stay alive on the last hard mile of a killing night. Drifted blind before the norther into the frozen draws, and the fence corners and lost by the thousands, the Coronado Land and Cattle Company ruined in one white week, in the one dark it had never reckoned on. He was undone that winter, not by Della Ballard, but by the single arithmetic all his money had never taught him, which was that blood shows in the first mile and bottom shows in the last, and that a country is a dry year and a killing storm however green it looks in the spring, and Amos Thorne's fine-blooded stock, that had never once been asked what it had left when the day turned hard, had nothing, and neither at the bottom of it did he. He walked out of that courthouse a smaller man than had walked in, and he did not stop being smaller. Judge Cyrus Tandy cleared Della Ballard of everything in one dry sentence, and decreed the Ballard write the senior appropriation on Rincon Creek in perpetuity off the record and the survey and the book, and ordered the Anvil Dam torn out and the creek turned back down the Ladder B ditch where it had run since '69, and cleared Wade Amory of Owen Ballard's death 2 winters buried, and referred Amos Thorne and the vanished Cull Renning to the grand jury for the unlawful dam, the fouling of the tank, the theft of the impounded water, the rustling under a false road brand, and the murder of Owen Ballard on a cut cinch. And then, before he rapped his gavel, he did a thing not strictly in the law. He looked over his spectacles at the small brown woman, and then out the courthouse door to where a big, plain, red horse could be seen standing hipshot and rimed with ice and patient in the churned snow of the street, 16 fresh stitches dark on his shoulder, having just carried 110 miles of blizzard, the proof that broke a cattle king, and he said, dry as ever, to the whole room, I have sat this bench 20 years, and I have watched this country reckon the worth of a woman and the worth of a horse by looking at the one thing about each it was too proud and too green to see past. It has cost the county, by my count this week, 1 cattle king, 1 runoff range boss, a company's whole-blooded herd, and its own good name. That cold blood scrub the country wouldn't give $1 for, just carried the mail of this whole case 110 miles over the divide, through a storm that killed the finest blooded stock in the territory where it stood. Court's adjourned. Somebody go water that red horse at the town trough, and see he drinks his fill, for he has earned this country's water if any creature ever born in it has. She paid the note that same week over Marcus Reddick's own counter in the county seat bank, $1,200 in hard coin, and a mail draft against the fall's honest sale, in front of whoever cared to watch, and folded the canceled paper into the back of Owen's tally book, beside the cut cinch and the dam chip and the closed lock. The loss and its ending pressed flat together like 2 pages of one story, and she rode home to the ladder B through a country going white and clean under the first honest snow. The Ballard outfit made a ranch that winter out of the people the country had thrown away. Meadow Riel took the foreman's job at a foreman's wage and a foreman's respect, both a long time overdue, and ran the ladder B for 30 years and raised his sons on it. Effie Doone kept the Crossroads store and its good deep well till she died in her own bed by her own stove 9 winters on, which is the death an old woman prays for, and never once let the country forget it was her lantern on the pass that brought the girl and the horse down off the divide. Wade Amory, cleared by a cut cinch and the judge's own mouth of a death he had carried 2 years, straightened the last of the way up out of the bottle and the blame, and grew back into the man he had been before the cavalry broke him, and shod and doctored the finest string of homebred horses in the territory before he was through. Tyree Hale, cleared by his own honesty and the court's mercy, grew that winter into the man he had ridden through a blizzard to become, and rode for the ladder B, and then bought his own little outfit up the creek before he was 30, and married, and named his first son Owen. And the country, which had crossed the street on Wade Amory for 2 years over a lie a cut cinch told, heard the whole of that lie undone in 2 days, and the crossing of the street reversed itself, as those things do, too late to be worth much and just in time to matter. He stayed. He had never quite left, all that hard fall and winter, finding reasons about the horses and the ditch, and one evening at the tail of the winter, with the ice going off Rincon Creek and the water running clean and full down the Ballard ditch again onto a meadow greening early, Wade Amory stood at Della's gate with his hat in his good hand and his mended arm sound again, and did not make a speech, because he was not a man who made them. I've got no name worth much, though it's worth more this spring than last, he said, looking out at the big red horse on the new grass and not at the woman, and a lamed cavalry knee, and a set of hands that know a hoof and a hurt, and about 2 years of drift left in me I'd as soon not take. But I've drifted about as far as a man wants to drift. There's a place at your fire, if ever you'd have a man stop drifting at it. Della Ballard looked at him a while, the way the horse looked at a new thing, taking her time, and then she said, There's an outfit wants the best farrier in the territory, and a ditch wants a partner to ride it, and a fire wants a man that knows when not to fill the quiet. Unroll your bed, Wade. Stay. And that was all, and it was enough, and there was no kiss at the gate that spring for the country to talk about, only a lamp that burned later in the latter bee kitchen than a lone woman's lamp had burned in 2 years, and after a while a quiet wedding at the little church at the county seat that Effie Doone and the sewing circle came to and behaved themselves at. And the big red stud turned out on the greenest grass of the home meadow to graze while it went on. He lived a long time, coppered the wire scar healed to a seam under the red 16 stitches worth, one more of the old faint scars the working years leave on a working horse, and Della never once let anyone forget how it got there or what it had held. He got on the good home mares, a line of big, honest, deep-bottomed colts that carried the mail and the freight and the long, dry circles of that country for a generation, and made the latter bee brand a thing the freighters and the stagemen and the drought country stockmen would pay real money for at last, because the country had finally, expensively, learned the lesson Owen Ballard bred into a horse and died trying to teach it, that speed is a fair weather friend, and bottom is the one that comes for you in the storm. Copper carried Della herself on the long circles another dozen years, over the divide and across the ford and up the dry country in every weather, and he went gray at the muzzle at the last, and it changed nothing at all, because he had never been ruled by anything but his own deep, honest heart, and had none of that to lose to age, and he gave a rider his whole bottom to the end. And when he lay down at last in the deep grass of the home meadow and did not get up, they buried him on the rise above the yard beside Owen, the breeder and the bred, and turned the creek that year down a new lateral of the ditch, so that the water Owen Ballard filed for in 1869 would run green over the both of them every spring the country lived. Owen Ballard used to say a thing over the worst of the dry years and the longest of the hard rides, the thing that had gotten his daughter up off a hot doorway floor and out onto 110 miles of killing storm no one thought she could hold. He said rain makes every pasture green. Any fool with a wet spring and a fat-blooded horse can look fine in the cool of the morning. It is the dry year that asks whose roots went down, and the last mile that asks what a thing is left when the day has turned to kill you both. And most everything folks throw away, he said, every coarse scrub horse and drummed-out man and unwed girl and small dried-out holder the green easy country has already priced at $1 and quit troubling to look at. Most of it is not worthless at all. It is only bred, quiet, for a harder country than the one that's judging it, waiting at the bottom of the long, dry mile where nobody rich ever bothers to ride, on the kind of drought and the kind of dark and the kind of killing weather that finally show the world what it was for all along.